Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here today, and I would like to thank our Chief of Detectives, Dermot Shea, for coming and joining us, as well as our Commanding Officer, Inspector Richard Green of the Gun Violence Suppression Unit. Today we're here once again to talk about guns, gangs, and the victims who are sometimes hurt or even killed as a result of senseless gang violence. This case has been called One Nation, Folk One Nation. And what's interesting about this case is how we're working together with the NYPD to tackle the persistent problem of gang violence in pockets of Brooklyn. Our strategy is to focus in on the most dangerous drivers of violent crime in our community. As the elected district attorney, it's my obligation to keep the people of Brooklyn safe and to do things that promote public trust in our justice system. And I believe that focusing our resources on the most violent offenders is how we're going to continue to bring the decline of violent crime in our communities and increase public safety. Today, we're announcing the indictment of 21 men who have been variously charged with murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, weapons possession, assaults, and even armed robbery. These defendants share one thing in common, and we allege that that thing is that all 21 of these men are members of the folk gang. You have different subsets. You have the SRK folk and the Newkirk folk. On the bottom, you have some other subsets, but they all come together to commit acts of violence, to exercise geographic dominance over their rivals. Those rivals often live in Canarsie and are members of either the Bloods or the Crips and other subsets, and they're engaging in a war with these with rival gang members. They've been doing it for years. This investigation spans 2 years. We started this investigation going back to July of 2016 to the present, and these are some of the most dangerous people we allege in Brooklyn. Now, another thing that we've noticed in this case, and I think something that was very discouraging and disturbing for me, is how gang life and gang culture is spread from one generation to the other generation. And what we saw in this case, which was unique, was that some of the older gang members, in particular some of the members of the Newkirk gang who were more experienced and a little bit older, sort of took a mentoring role over younger gang members to sort of initiate them into gang life, to teach them how to commit illegal crime. We actually have, if you look all the way to your far right, Taro Herbert. He's on the far right. And before I talk about Taro, I should tell you that he's also under indictment on a separate case. We allege he was responsible for the murder of Anthony Francis in September of 2016. He likes to boast that the younger gang members come to him, seek his counsel, his advice, and he claims that he's the big homie. What's the big homie mean? Well, that's a reference that's often given to one of the gang leaders. He's a self-proclaimed gang leader. Some of the other older defendants, there's a guy, Walter Porter. Now, Walter Porter is an older gang member, we allege, who shares the sad privilege of being indicted with his two sons, Kayshawn Porter and Kamari Porter. He cautions his sons about walking dirty, which means carrying a gun, that they could be stopped by the police. He cautions his sons about trying to sell a firearm that has been used in previous shootings, because if the buyer of the guns gets apprehended later by the police, they might be able to identify his sons in having sold those guns and implicate them in those murders. Now, before you think that that's just street savvy advice from a father to sons, we also have learned that he also counsels them how to disassemble firearms. So when they're transporting them from one place to another, if they're stopped by the police, that they won't be able to be charged with criminal possession of a weapon because we can't prove that the gun is operable. By simply disassembling and moving a piece, the gun can't fire, and hence he can't be charged. The underlying indictments in this case allege that in Flatbush, in East Flatbush, there was a group of young gang members who were ready, willing, and able to use firearms to attack rival gang members and commit other violent crimes like robbery when the opportunity arose. The charged defendants focused their attacks mostly against rivals in Canarsie. We allege, including the murder of 22-year-old Darren Harrison. And some of these defendants, when we were doing this investigation, by their own words, they can't remember, they don't know why they're shooting at each other. They have no historical knowledge of what started this feud in the first place. They just know that they're expected to shoot at and attempt to kill rival opposition gang members. This is how pointless, this is how impersonal this gang culture is. They're shooting at each other and don't even know why. The indictment, as I said, covers from July of 2016 through the present. It's a result of a very lengthy investigation that relied on electronic surveillance, physical surveillance, much and very complicated analysis of social media and other digital technologies, and many communications between gang members that we were allowed to get based on court orders. There were other investigatory techniques that were used, but as a result of the investigation, we are now charging several in connection with 2 murders, one which was unsolved, and also with the non-fatal shooting of 4 other individuals in other acts of violence. I also want to emphasize that this is a very focused takedown. This is not just a widespread, let's round up a bunch of alleged gang members. This was a focused takedown on drivers of actual violent crime. These are the offenders who we believe are responsible for the vast majority of violent crime in the neighborhoods where they reside. And this kind of violence is gun violence. I'm going to talk about the first homicide charge in this indictment. We allege that the shooter, one of the shooters, was Kayshawn Porter, acting in concert with other co-defendants, including Travis LaRock and Tahir Thomas. They appear on the first part of the box under SRK. There were rival gang members hanging out, and on Facebook Live, they were putting out their location. And so these gang members found out where their rivals were at. They directed Kayshawn Porter and others to the location where the rivals were hanging out, and Kayshawn Porter and others shot at them, killing Darren Harrison and shooting another person. About a minute, maybe a minute and a half after the shooting, we hear Kayshawn Porter communicating with his fellow gang members, bragging about the shooting. Can we get Kayshawn Porter texting with his fellow gang members? We spun them. We had them ducking, rolling, running. Just 2 weeks later, on February 20, 2017, we allege that members of the same crew were involved in another murder, this time of 15-year-old Rohan Levy. The gunman that you're about to see is an indicted defendant, Zidon Clark. Zidon, you will see in a moment, will get out of a car and fire a couple of shots before returning back to the car and taking off. Let's get to the screen where Zidon is shooting. See the car, that car, by the way, we allege belongs to the Porters. He's coming out the car. We allege that's Zidon Clark. Right there in the middle of the street. He shoots, goes back to the car, he comes back and continues to shoot. Those shots wind up striking Rohan Levy, 15-year-old boy, and killing him, and striking one of his friends that he was with. He was the victim of mistaken identity. You see, these gang members thought that he was a rival gang member that they believed was a guy named Sleepy Hollow, and they were shooting at him. Rohan, 15 years old, wanted to be an architect, had siblings. He was a popular boy who was just on his way home joking with his two friends when he was slain on our streets, and you've seen the video. It's a residential block in the middle of the afternoon. This is senseless violence that must be clamped down on. Our investigation revealed that shortly after the shooting and the murder, one of the gang members, Travis LaRock, allegedly says and puts out a notice to all the other gang members, keep it to yourself. Don't say nothing what happened today. Keep it to yourself. This was a high-profile murder of a 15-year-old, and they knew that the police would be all over this case trying to solve it. Just 4 days after Rohan Levy was killed, the Porter family, Walter Porter, the father, and his two sons, Kayshawn and Kamari, were driving in a car. That car was stopped based on information that the police had. And in that car, Kamari had a firearm in the backpack that we allege belonged to him. But the police found dismantled guns in the car. They found two guns in particular, a .40 caliber pistol that was allegedly used in the murder of Darren Harrison. That's the homicide that took place in Canarsie, and a .380 pistol that was allegedly used in the murder of young Rohan Levy. The guns were dismantled, made to be inoperable, and we believe were on the way of being disposed of. Now I'm going to just show you another shooting that demonstrates how brazen these gang members are. This took place approximately on December 28th, 2016, in the corner of Utica Avenue and President right here in Brooklyn. That's Rohan Levy. This is people shopping right after Christmas. That guy right there just fired, that we allege. That's Defendant LaRock. He runs, scatters, and everyone starts scattering. Those people running with him are fellow gang members. We know who they are. This is people going about their holiday shopping. Travis LaRock fires a shot, and it's another non-fatal shooting of a rival gang member. This brazen and disturbing conduct must come to an end. We're going to do everything we can to hold these folks accountable for what they've done. What also came out during the course of this investigation, and what's particularly troubling to me, is this preoccupation that our young men have with guns and have with violence. We have, the investigation revealed multiple images of young men playing with guns, testing them, seemingly in love with holding a firearm. We're going to play a few examples of this just so you could see how random and violent this can be. Let's go to the first one. Now, we allege that Kamari Porter is shooting outside of the front door of his home.
Oh,
Back
shit,
door. Just randomly shooting across his courtyard towards other buildings. On the rooftop, on the next video, we're going to see defendant Khalil Irving. We allege that he's just callously shooting towards another building.
God, tell me you ready. Wait, no, not yet.
Now, obviously he's endangering every person who lives in those buildings, but he's doing more than that, because in those buildings, he's sending a message. Rival gang members live in that building, and he's sending a message that it's not safe for them to come outside. In the next video, we're going to see defendant Travis LaRock again, and he's seated next to one of his fellow gang members, Gashani Gray. And we're going to see them on the subway. If you look in his hand, in his left hand and his right hand, he's loading his magazine with bullets on the train in front of many passengers. Imagine the fear that you would have sitting on that train seeing these young men loading guns. Now, that actually happened just about a few hours before the December shooting that defendant LaRock was in. He's wearing the same outfit from the shooting. Just a few hours earlier, he's playing with that gun on the subway. So, as I said, these are the drivers of crime. These are not just random people who've been picked up and charged with possession of guns. These are the most dangerous offenders, and under the Justice 2020 initiative and my, working with the police department, these are the people that we're going to hold accountable and continue to use our enforcement strategy. I believe that strategy is bearing fruit. This is the third or fourth takedown that we've done in this section of Brooklyn, where these crews are operating. We've seen in recent years a tremendous decline in shootings. Homicides are down by about 50% in this part of Brooklyn South, and shootings are down an additional 35%, and that's on top of last year's record decline. So we know that the summer is ongoing now. I believe that this takedown will have a measurable impact on safety in the communities of Flatbush, East Flatbush, and Canarsie, and will continue to allow people to actually enjoy their summer without the fear of random gun violence. The other thing, can I get the face page? Besides the two murders that we're talking about today and the murder that I told you that Terrell Herbert was involved in, defendant Reen Awang and Darren Wilson, they're there on the bottom right-hand corner under the Newkirk Gang label. They're also been indicted for murder. We allege that they were responsible, acting with others, in the killing of Anthony Francis on September 2nd, 2016. So altogether, there are 4 homicides and a number of non-fatal shootings that we believe that this Folk Nation group have been responsible for in the last 2 years in that area. The law-abiding citizens of Brooklyn and our city deserve to live in peace and security and not worry about sending their children out in the street being caught crossfire from guns. And I promise that we will continue to do these investigations. You see this team behind us. It's time-consuming work. The detectives from the police department, the ADAs and detective investigators in my office have spent hundreds of hours on going through the social media and going through the electronic surveillance to make this case, and I want to thank them. They're complicated, time-consuming cases. You have to match physical evidence, casings that are found at crime scenes or bullets from social media posts. You have to put it all together, but the prosecutors from my team have done a tremendous job, as well as the police department. I'm going to let Chief Shea speak in a moment. But I also want to take the moment to say that in my office, we've been building capacity to do these cases. I've recently hired a new chief of our crime strategies unit and violent criminal enterprise unit. I just want him to be recognized. Ray Tierney. He's one of the finest gang prosecutors in the state of New York. He's joining us from the Eastern District of New York. I've also had the pleasure of promoting two longtime prosecutors in my office. Al DeAngelis, was Al here? I think it's Al. He's been promoted to the bureau chief of our violent criminal enterprise unit. And John Sennett, where are you at, John? John Sennett has been promoted to first deputy chief, and John has been very responsible for helping organize this particular case. I also have Nicole Chavis next to me, who is one of the finest gang prosecutors in the city of New York. She's been very involved in these cases, and I've had the pleasure last month of promoting her to my executive team so we can continue to do this great work together. Thank you, everyone, and let's hear from Chief Shea.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. I think it's important that we tell this story. It's a good day for the people of Brooklyn. That's my takeaway from this. It's a good day for mothers that are sending their kids out to play in playgrounds, worried about their kids walking to school, people that live and work in Brooklyn. I really want to thank, and I'll turn it over to Inspector Green in a second, Richard Green and the Gun Violence Suppression Division and the entire team. As the DA mentioned, these are painstaking cases. They take a lot of time, they take a lot of effort, and it is truly a collaborative effort to put these cases together. I am biased here, but I like to think that these are some of the finest cases that are being put together in the nation. Cases where we're building prosecutions on individuals when no one wants to cooperate at times. And this is at the core of what we do every day with precision policing. Driving down arrest rates, at the same time simultaneously keeping the neighborhood safer. So I think it's a win-win. 21 individuals that quite frankly nobody wanted to send to prison, but they earned it. They earned it and will comply. And we have more coming for anyone that does not get it. We have zero tolerance for people that are going to carry illegal firearms on the streets of this city. I will not embarrass some of the prosecutors behind me, but I will tell you that I have known many of them for years. I see them on a weekly basis at CompStat meetings. And again, these are some of the finest prosecutions, difficult. So it's truly a collaborative effort. And the one piece of this that's missing is the community, where every one of these cases literally starts with the community involvement. So we have not forgotten you. We are here to make New York City even safer. We are not content to have crime rates rise, whether it's Queens, Brooklyn, or Staten Island, whether it's property crime, or certainly here with violent crime. 911 calls, 311 calls, information passed on from a beat cop to our investigators, and then working collaboratively. So again, a win-win. The streets in New York City, and particularly Brooklyn, are safer with these 21 individuals. Rich, you want to go into a little more detail?
Sure. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. DA. Good morning, everyone. I'm Inspector Richard Green, the commanding officer of the Gun Violence Suppression Division, and I'm pleased to be here this morning to announce the arrest of several of these members of the Folk Nation gang. Last week, members of my office effected the arrest of 19 individuals for numerous acts of violence, including murder, shootings, robberies, reckless discharge, and possession of illegal weapons. But before I go on, I have to introduce and praise members of the gun violence team, including to my right, the commanding officer of the Brooklyn Zone, who's Captain Thomas Pisolo, our chief strategist, Lieutenant Richard Zacharis, Sergeants Richard Young, Ed Deegan, and Andy Dutton, and last but far from least, case detectives Andy Ramaya and Sean Feliciano. Also around the room are many of the detectives whose tireless contributions to this case cannot be overlooked. These diligent investigators work lockstep with their partners from Kings County District Attorney's Office to pour through mountains of evidence to develop the successful prosecution we see here today. And I'd be remiss if I didn't specifically mention, I will embarrass him, Chief, Executive and Supervisory DAs John Sennett and Line DAs Gianna Baracol and James Buchanan, whose day-to-day interactions with detectives and supervisors created an environment for collaborative success. And of course, the DA himself, who shared our commitment to bringing these violent individuals to justice. The case you see before you embodies the strategy of precision policing, a methodology that embraces focusing on the most violent members of the community, those that are responsible for repeated acts of gun violence, here for the benefit or at the direction of their gang. And in this case, that gang is Folk Nation. As the district attorney enumerated, this year-long investigation yielded a 65-count indictment, which included 2 murders, 3 non-fatal shootings, a robbery, and numerous acts of reckless discharge and possession of these illegal weapons. The violence spanned numerous communities here in Brooklyn and utilized various members of the Detective Bureau, Intelligence Division, and Patrol Bureau, including our NCOs. I would also like to acknowledge the contributions of countless New York City and outside jurisdiction agencies that assisted us on this crucial investigation and shared our commitment. The Gun Violence Suppression Division, as the Chief mentioned, is committed to that relentless pursuit of those who choose to commit these heinous acts of violence right here in Brooklyn and every community within this great city. So thank you. If there's any questions, be happy to take some.
Any questions about the case?
So, you said that 19 arrests were made last week. Does that include for the murder of Rohan Levy? And can you just explain a little bit why that arrest couldn't be made earlier if it's a murder from 2017?
So that was, I had indicated they were previously unsolved murder. The Zyder and Clark had been previously apprehended and indicted. We've re-indicted him based on the new information that we obtained during this investigation. We are trying to give justice to Rohan Levy. That includes holding accountable the other members that we believe were in the car, and we're working towards building that case for to make sure that they're all fully accountable. We strongly believe we know who was responsible for that case, and this investigation to that extent continues. But we've added new charges as it relates to that older homicide because we now have all the conspiracy charges to add to it. Any other questions?
So it's 21 arrests that was altogether, right? 19.
Right. There's 21 individuals. There's been 1 or 2 individuals who are not technically in custody yet. And I should say that when they were arraigned, heavy bail was given on these defendants, including remand for those charged with homicides. Any other questions?
How many are you still standing?
2 individuals.
2.
Any priors? Do they all have priors?
There's a lot. I mean, there's too many defendants to get into each one, but there's many people who have different levels of criminal activity. Some are predicates, some are not predicates. But based on the charges, everyone on the conspiracy charge is looking upwards of 25 years. 2 of the offenders were 15 at the time that they were shooters, and they're charged as juvenile offenders. They face a maximum of 15 to life, and the adults face 25 to life on the homicide charges. Yes, Marsha.
How were decisions made about who to go after, who the targets were, and who made them? Like, who decided who to shoot and why? Like, was there some grand person that said shoot this person, shoot that person? And like, did they give orders? Like, how did it all work?
Well, I think the answer to your question is there a hierarchy in these gangs? It's not the type of hierarchy that some of us envision, but they, for the most part, go and have committed themselves to killing rivals, shooting at rivals. And so there's a lot of coordination and communication in doing that work, finding out where rivals are at. It's crazy as it sounds. I mean, really terrible. These members go out on what they call hunting expeditions into rival territory, looking for opposition gang members just to shoot them. So it's random, it's whoever they can get, but obviously they know who their targets are.
So I guess the question is this, in the murder of Rohan Levy, was there somebody they were looking for?
Yes,
Or
they thought that the person they were shooting at was a rival gang member called Sleepy Hollow. We believe that it was a case of mistaken identity as it related to that young man's death,
And why did they want to kill Sleepy Hollow?
just because he's a rival. Just because he's a rival. One of the things that was really disturbing in this case is that in communications between gang members, they often asked themselves, why are we after this person, whatever, and a lot of it was historical, that, you know, in the past, someone from their gang had been killed by someone or shot at someone from another gang, and this was retaliation, ongoing cycle of retribution and retaliation.
So because they told each other not to talk about the killing of Rohan Levy, did they realize they had shot an innocent person?
It was all over the media when Rohan Levy was shot. I mean, he was a 15-year-old, and they knew, we allege, that the shooter, knew exactly who he was thinking he was shooting at, and realized that they didn't hit the right person.
Is Sleepy Hollow still alive?
Yes.
Can you go into a little bit of the nature of this rivalry? I know it's kind of geographic, but what other components are there to the story? What is the nature of the rivalry?
It's senseless. It's rivalry largely from the Flatbush, East Flatbush section of Brooklyn. It's folk nation gang members and the different subsets of folk nation who are at war with what they call the Wool. The Wool is in the Flossie section of Brooklyn, which we know as Canarsie. The Wool consists of Bloods and Crips and other gang subsets of those gangs, and it's a historic, for years now, pending mutual combat situation where they will shoot at rivals on sight. Not because anything specifically is happening, but it's geographic dominance over their fellow gang members. So gang members who come into a different territory are alleged to be there to spin the block, which just means to agitate the other gang, because their presence on rival territory will often lead to senseless gun violence. I don't know if there's anything else to add to that, but it's really nonsense, but it's deadly.
Is there a drug component to this?
This particular case is not based around narcotics, an illicit sale of narcotics. It's strictly focusing on violence. Like the DA enumerated, it transcends generations. It's regional. There's many different methods in which these groups will taunt each other, and it results in the most violent acts possible. Spinning the block, as the DA said, going out, as you saw in some of the videos, sending messages by shooting, and unfortunately, you all too often see instances like Rohan Levy where an unintended target is shot or even ultimately killed.
What is spinning the floss mean? That was in the press release.
As the DA had said, flossy is an terminology that the gangs use for the Canarsie area. So spinning the floss would mean that they're going out in vehicles usually to invite trouble, look for rival gang members, and ultimately shoot at them.
Will this make the Juve celebration safer?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Well, the police department spends an enormous amount of time and of course, confers with the district attorney on the best possible practices for the Juve celebration and the subsequent parade and celebration afterwards. So we do know there have been acts of violence. We consistently are aware of them, study them, see who's committing them, and do whatever we can to put in place safeguards to ensure the safety for the members of Brooklyn during the Juve celebration or any celebration here in Brooklyn and throughout the city.
I would just concur with Rich's statement there. Naturally, it makes Brooklyn safer, the parade. This is something that we do, not just with this parade, but any large events throughout the city. What intelligence do we have, what's going on in the particular area, and then we'll address it accordingly. But certainly with sections of Brooklyn, with gang activity, we look to identify, prioritize, and put the best of the best on them. Whether it's our homicide squad, it's our numbered squads, our gun violence, all working together with the prosecutors. Precision.
And as I've indicated, right, we have the arrest of Darren Harrison, for his killing, the re-indictment and added charges on the Rohan Levy killing, but we also indicated there were 2 other homicides just in that 2-year span that we know that these people were responsible. So that's 4 killings in 2 years in a close geographic area. Knowing that we're getting these types of people off the streets inevitably makes our community safer.
District Attorney
Yes.
Gonzalez, I wonder how you feel about the comments made yesterday by police officials that your diversion programs in Brooklyn are adding to the number of people with guns on the street.
Well, like everyone else, I'm concerned with shootings that take place in Brooklyn. I'm sworn to protect the people of Brooklyn from gang and gun violence, and we will continue to make cases like this that do exactly that. Diversion, is a very small slice of cases that we do, but to make it clear, no one who's involved in these kinds of acts of violence are eligible for diversion. People who use guns, whether for armed robberies or for shootings, are not diverted. We believe that in order to do this work, we have to get to the underlying issue of holding accountable those who commit these acts. And as you saw, they're being held accountable 2 years after the shootings.
So was the criticism unfair?
So I'm going to be meeting with the mayor and the police commissioner later today, and we will sort of iron out sort of our differences. But we know and we believe that capacity to do these types of cases, both on the police department side and the DA side, is key to keeping us safe. We can't have people who commit shootings not getting arrested. And so we're going to figure out how to do more of these cases. And I think it's also important to make it clear that while we've had an uptick in Brooklyn North in the number of shootings, overall the number of homicides in Brooklyn are down again for the 3rd consecutive year. We're down a tremendous number even from last year's record low in terms of homicides. We're even down overall. We actually have 2 fewer shootings as of yesterday than we had last year. So Brooklyn continues to get safer. We recognize there's an uptick in a particular geographic area. We have to do our best to clamp that down. But the people of Brooklyn should know that we've never been safer. We've never been more committed to doing this work, and we're going to get to a point when we will not have an uptick in that area. A tremendous amount of effort is required to drive violence. The question about whether or not diversion adds to issues of violence, I have to see the data. One of the things that we say here in Brooklyn is that we try to divert a very small subset of young people who we believe can be removed from gang life or be removed from violence and make the community safer. Because one of the issues that we know is that at some point, people who get arrested with a gun who are not using it will return back to the community. So the question is, can we not only interrupt them while they're carrying a gun and making sure that that doesn't happen again, but can we make them more productive? Can we get them into programs? And our Department of Criminal Justice has evaluated, the State Department of Criminal Justice Services have evaluated This ongoing diversion program is over a decade old and found that only 7% of those who graduate are convicted of a felony in the last 3 years.
So will you continue the diversion programs that your office runs?
Well, we have no intent to not do it, but like I said, we're going to speak with the mayor and the police commissioner, and I'm going to hear them out about their concerns. I have some concerns about how we can do more of this work in terms of holding people accountable. I think some of it are, the things that we can do together to help get the closure rate, to a higher amount so that we have less of these offenders on the streets.
So what will you say to the mayor and the police commissioner?
Well, let me speak to them first. Yes.
Chief Monahan yesterday brought up specifically 2 individuals who were rearrested out of the diversion program. Do you think it's unfair of him to kind of cherry pick those 2 instances of people being arrested with guns again? I mean, do you think the diversion programs largely work?
Right. This is not about fairness. This is about, can we keep the people of Brooklyn safe? Those who go through diversion programs are cases that we screen carefully with the police department to see if there's something about that individual's background that would make them ineligible. We tend to find people who are younger, who possess the gun, whether it's in their home or somewhere else. They're not accused of using the gun in the commission of a crime. If they screw up and get rearrested for some other offense, then they're on the hook because they've pled guilty to criminal possession of a weapon, and they face mandatory jail. So we think that we can safely monitor them in the program, but it's not about fairness. I know that the Chief Monahan, the mayor, Chief Shea, and everyone here, we all share a singular purpose, which is keeping people safe. Yes.
Most of these are a few years ago. What do you attribute the more recent uptake? For example, in St. John's Precinct, there have been 12 shootings, 7 homicides this year. Those were significant increases compared to last year. What is the nature of the more recent?
Yeah, I'll let the chief get a crack at this, but it's gangs. It's gangs. In my career, I'm about to celebrate the start of my 25th year as a prosecutor this fall. Once there's shootings, there's a cycle of retribution and retaliation, and if it's not rooted out, they will go on until the right people will get arrested. And I believe that what we've seen in the uptick in Brooklyn North shootings is that we have gang offenders who are shooting at each other. When the police, and they will, make those arrests, those numbers will drop. We've seen that. We saw that in Coney Island a few years ago, where Coney Island had one of the highest shooting rates and became the safest precinct. It's like 79% reduction in overall crime, 40% reduction in violent crime. We've seen it in other parts of Brooklyn. We're seeing it today in Brooklyn South. We will see it tomorrow in Brooklyn North.
Which gangs?
I'm not going to get into which gangs. To the 77th precinct, they have, I believe, 12 shootings year to date. 11 of the 12 are categorized, as we stand here today, as gang-related. There is no mystery here. It's gangs and it's guns, and it's a deadly combination. We see a number of gangs, and it is not with this current group, operating throughout Brooklyn, sometimes moving precinct to precinct. As it's been said here, spinning the block, going from one neighborhood to another. Sometimes, as it's with this case, for no reason other than to shoot the opposition, sometimes over territory. So we see a little bit of both. This year, right now in New York City, over 50% of our shootings are gang-related. And as you can imagine, quite often people lie to us why we were shot, and they won't tell us why they were shot. So that number is significantly higher. This goes to the core of why we have a criminal group database, why it is an effective tool to root out gangs, to know where to deploy our people, to know where the next shooting is going to happen to keep people safe. I have every confidence in the people behind me, the investigators throughout the department, and not just the Brooklyn DA's office, but Southern District, Eastern District, our 5 prosecutors throughout New York City. We are all committed to the same thing, identifying people that are driving crime, not just violence, but primarily the violence, to keep people safe and to take them off the street and make New York City as safe as possible for people that follow the rules.
Thank you.
Mr. Attorney, yesterday your office issued a statement saying that in Brooklyn North, where there's been an increase in shootings, 67% of the cases are unsolved. Why is that? Does that go to the difficulty that your office and the police have in trying to make these kinds of cases?
Yeah, it directly goes to how difficult it is to get the participation from communities in neighborhoods where they're gang entrenched in daily life. People don't want to come forward. And even folks who are shot, as Chief Shea said, often will say, I heard a loud noise, and the next thing I knew, I felt sharp pain. I see cases after cases where people say they were shot at one location, but we know that's not true because the shot spotter was activated at a different location. They mislead the police. And that's why, we have to work closer together on these issues to bring these cases, because we're going to solve a lot of these cases without the participation of some of the eyewitnesses.
Does it also go to the street savvy of the gang members who know, for example, like in the Porter case, to keep the guns apart so that you can't charge them because it's an inoperable gun?
Yeah, there's a lot of knowledge that gang members think they have on how to defeat law enforcement. But at the end, as careful as they thought they would be, we were able to take down a very violent crew. This is the third takedown in a very short period of time that we've focused in on this area of Brooklyn. It's the second Folk Nation takedown. And every time we do that, we make tremendous, inroads in public safety. Again, we are moving in the right direction. And I think it's important that I say that the mayor say it, the police commissioner, because Brooklyn has two fewer shootings than we had last year, but in parts like Brooklyn South, where these shootings were rampant a few years ago, they're down 35% from last year's record lows. So we're moving in the right direction, and I want to assure the public that there is no space between ourselves in terms of trying to hold accountable violent gang offenders.
Thank you.
Thank you.